This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
Good morning, it's Sadiq Khan here, the Mayor of London. Just riffing about being on Speak to Sadiq this morning because James O'Brien hasn't given me a script. But it's great to be back as the re-elected Mayor of this great city with James O'Brien. And remember, this is your show, not James's show, not my show, your show. So please ring in or text and we'll have a chat over the course of the next 30, 40, 50 minutes. James, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Can you remember the number off the top of your head?
Of course not.
No, 0345 6060 973. I can say it in my sleep. Sorry, I got taken by surprise by the top of the programme then, so I just gestured at the Mayor to ask whether or not you wanted to do the introduction. You could have either nodded or shaken your head, but there you go, you went off.
I'm Mr. Amenable.
Absolutely.
In turn two, James.
On the turn. Well, as we wait for the first call, actually, no, I think we'll pass straight in. Jackson is in Dagenham. Jackson, what would you like to ask the Mayor?
Hello, Mayor. I supported you on all occasions, and I'll support you again. However, I think you failed. On Nick Ferrari's show, when people come on, they're asked, does Cressida Dick have your confidence? And they all say, politicians and police say, yes, she has our support. But what Nick Ferrari or other presenters don't say is, does she have the support of the public? And I think that is a crucial thing that everyone is missing on this. She doesn't have, especially in the black community, we've always known that there's corruption in the police and it's been swept under the carpet, and you, I'm sure, as a politician, are going to give her your full support. And I think you've failed in saying that, look, she's got problems she's got to deal with. One of them is this death in police custody. She has not come out and said these are the structures she will be putting in place to avoid those deaths in police custody. It's a failing. It's a failing.
Can I nudge you gently towards a question, Jackson? Would you mind awfully?
Yes, the question is, these deaths in the streets, largely in black communities, yes. How are you going to tackle it? Because the police are recruiting black youngsters to act as spies, and are these revenge killings?
Well, Jackson, thanks for your question and your candour and your support. Our Commissioner, Cressida Dick, acknowledged last year that the Met Police Service, which I think is the finest police service in the world, does have within it examples of racism, discrimination and bias. And the Met Police Service, to give them credit, working with City Hall, me and my deputy mayors, but also with communities across London, have produced an action plan to address some of the issues that you raise, serious issues that you raise. Because you're right, in some communities, black Londoners in particular, there is not the trust and confidence there should be in our police service. By the way, Jackson, the lack of trust and confidence extends to not just the police, but to the health service, to education, to politicians, to the media, and so forth. So there is a societal issue we've got to address, and I actually do believe there are structural issues we have to address. So, for example, Jackson, some of the recommendations in the action plan seek to address some of the points you've raised. For example, you're right, we do want to recruit, and I don't apologise for this, more diverse Londoners to join our police service. Why? So our police service looks more like the city that we want to police, but also that will engender a greater trust and confidence. But also, Jackson, we're keen to make sure we don't just recruit them, we retain them and they progress up the ranks of the police service. And the other big thing the police have agreed to do is for members of the public like you to be involved in the scrutiny of the police, whether it's recruitment, whether it's training, or whether it's monitoring use of things like handcuffs, things of people in custody and so forth, because we've got to make sure more Londoners have trust and confidence in our police service.
We need to talk about the figures as well. 18 with another death overnight. Violent crime down overall, murders down overall, but this particular type of murder, this knife crime, up. And the Daily Telegraph have helpfully calculated what would happen if the current rate continued to the end of the year, and it would be the highest since your office was invented in 2008.
Look, I'm not going to talk about
I've been asking you about this pretty much since the first time we met.
Yeah.
And things are worse than they were then.
Well, I think to give you credit, in your introduction, you commented on the progress made with homicides going down, violent crime going down,
facts are important,
youth violence going down. But it is a fact, and it's heartbreaking because I meet the families, that the number of teenage homicides this year is going up versus last year. And that's why I welcome yesterday the police gave a hard-hitting press conference to explain some of the stuff we're doing this summer to address this issue. One of them is a very simple campaign: hard calls save lives, encouraging mum, dad, big brother, big sister, anybody. If somebody in your family is leaving the home with a knife, with a dangerous instrument, please let us know, because that makes them more safe taking it off them rather than less safe. Across this summer, Londoners will be seeing a greater police presence across our city, particularly in areas where there's been a history of violent crime, and you'll be seeing surge activity in those areas. At the same time, James, the good news is we're going to be giving young people even more constructive things to do to keep them busy during the summer. Sports, education, culture during the daytime, events at the weekend, funding youth workers to work with young people, because there's no point us complaining when idle hands get up to no good. We've got to give idle hands constructive things to do.
You understand the frustration of people listening, though, who will detect an air of Groundhog Day here. I mean, the figures aren't going down on the most crucial metric of young people who are actually being killed, and some of the answers stroke excuses are as old as the hills. I mean, that what you just said is a variation, an evolution on youth clubs, isn't it? Which has always been part of this conversation.
Except to be fair, even you conceded homicides are going down. So clearly
it's not
things
a
are
question
working.
of conceding. We're not in competition.
Well,
I just think it's important the listeners know the facts. So this particular area,
progress has been made.
Why is it happening, do you think? I'm genuinely interested in whether or not there's a different type of crime occurring.
No, it's a very
some young
question.
people are setting out to actually kill rather than carrying a knife because they might be frightened and they end up using it themselves, which would explain non-death knife crime.
It's very important.
But for deaths to go up, a certain type of criminal, and that's why people mention gangs, because they're seeking to murder rather than the murder being a consequence of the proliferation of knives.
No, we've looked into this, as you'd appreciate, and there are complex reasons, but it's actually quite simple, which is, without excusing criminality, there are a number of explanations for it. There could be deprivation, lack of opportunity, inequalities and so forth. And they've been compounded by this pandemic. But also we're seeing actually a 1 inch difference between here and there can be the difference between a life, an injury being life-changing versus one being life-ending. As brilliant as the paramedics are, what we're seeing this year is fewer stabbings, but the consequence is more serious. And that's why it's so important to say anybody leaving their home with a knife is taking a risk with their own safety and others. But you're right, Nick, James, it is younger people who are the larger homicides this year versus last year, and that's why we've got to bear down on this.
We may, no doubt other people may ask you about that in the meantime. Before we go to Colette, who's in Enfield, I just want to hear a little bit more about the vaccination hubs that are opening up in stadiums this weekend. Yeah,
well, there's fantastic news. From today, anybody above the age of 18 is eligible for a jab. You don't need to know your NHS number. You don't need to know who your GP is. You just need to have an arm, basically, and you can get a jab. And so tomorrow, Chelsea and Charlton football clubs will be opening up their stadiums. Charlton open about 8 a.m. and the first 1,000 get a free ticket to the first game next year. West Ham, you can pre-book tomorrow.
This is like it's been popular in America and other countries. These are incentives, carrots rather than sticks.
Absolutely right. Spurs open up on Sunday. Arsenal next week. Later on today, I'll be on my social media outlets letting Londoners know exactly where they can go. And my message to Londoners is please, please, please turn up and receive the jab. This is the game changer that allows us to reopen sooner rather than later, and it saves your life as well.
Speaking of vaccinations, the 806 hospitalisations, only 84 of those have had both doses. That's the hospitalisations with Delta. Deaths remain very, very low. Do you think that one newspaper this morning reports that the lifting might come a little earlier than the worst case scenario? Do you have any insights into that?
The key metrics the government is concerned about, rightly so, is making sure as many of us as possible have both doses to immunise ourselves from either catching the virus or making it less likely and the consequences being less severe. The good news is our hospitals have not as many people with the virus as previously, not as many in intensive care, not as many people, thankfully, are dying. The problem is the variant is spreading because we still haven't got the coverage we would like. The good news in London is 8 million doses administered. 3 million of us have had both doses, 5 million just the one. So as many of us as possible, if you have had your first dose, please make sure you go back for the second dose. And particularly those above the age of 18, please take your first dose, because that will enable us to reopen our city to the way we want it to be reopened.
So, I mean, do you think it will happen early, or are we still watching the numbers?
We're still watching the numbers of actually jabs being administered, and that's why it's really important. If people get the jab as soon as possible, it means our chances are more likely to reopen rather than less. What the Prime Minister said was July the 19th was a destination,
yes.
Sort of a terminus rather than, the earliest possible. It is possible. I saw the front page of the newspaper, Daily Mail you're referring to. They talked about possible July the 5th if progress is made sufficiently in advance over the next 2 weeks. And that's why it's really important. Let's do our bit.
Speaking of the Prime Minister, do you share his view that Matt Hancock is completely effing hopeless?
Well, look, I mean, I don't want to get into name calling and stuff, and I think being flippant about it. I think there are lots of things Matt Hancock has got wrong. There are some things he's got right. I think it's important for us to look at, the things that he's got wrong, to remedy them in real time. The key thing is for the government to get a grip going forward. There'll be a public inquiry in due course. I'm keen to make sure that continues to have good relations with the Vaccines Minister, Nadeem Zahawi, who's done a great job in giving us the vaccines we need. I'm speaking to him again later on today. And we want to work collegially with the government to, defeat this virus.
Actually, we'll go to Colette in Enfield. That's more than enough from me.
Hi, Colette. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Khan. Congratulations on your reappointment.
That's very kind, thank you.
The only thing I would say to you is got to move on the housing, more housing being built. That's what I'd like to see. This may be a groundhog question because it leads on from what Jackson said. As the Met has now been labelled, or it has been institutionally racist, and it now has an additional label of institutionally corrupt. And I note that Cressida Dick, when it comes to institutional racism, she describes it as an unhelpful term. And when it came to the institutional corrupt of this week label, rejected the claim almost immediately because they did not like the definition that was used by that particular panel. So the question for me is, where does the Met go now? Because I can't imagine that there's any other additional label that could cause such reputational damage.
Yeah, Claire, thanks for your questions, both on housing and this. On housing, just to reassure you, we are making good progress on housing. Record numbers of council homes began last year. We're on course to break that record this year, and we've got to fix this housing crisis once and for all. In relation to the police...
And the Daniel Morgan inquiry.
Yeah, look, we employ in London, over the last 5 years, thanks to City Hall investment, now more than 32,000 police officers, men and women who risk their lives and, in my view, are heroic. And we've got thousands of police staff. Yes, there are, some of them who, frankly speaking, probably shouldn't be in the police service, and we're doing our best to get them out of the police service. We have, in terms of corruption, Colette, the biggest anti-corruption command in the country, and it's no consolation to you and me, but they over the last year have kicked out dozens of police officers against whom allegations have been made where the complaint's been upheld. We also have now, we didn't have in 1987, when Daniel Morgan was brutally murdered, a proper anti-corruption strategy, a proper anti-fraud strategy, and a whistleblowing policy. And the police service in 2021 is a million miles from the police service in 1987, but you're spot on. We can't be complacent. So I've asked our team to make sure that what the Home Secretary said to the police, she wants the police to respond to the panel report. We're going to wait and see what the response from that police service is, to make sure they acknowledge the seriousness of the findings. And separately, Colette, Her Majesty's Inspectorate are looking into the recommendations made from the panel to make sure they're confident in relation to the failings recognised have been addressed. And we've got to make sure that what we don't want is members of the public thinking the entire police service is either racist or corrupt, and therefore they don't come forward to cooperate with the police service. That would be really damaging to our ability to fight crime.
Do you know why Cressida Dick took so long to hand over vital documents in the Daniel Morgan?
Yeah, the concern the police had was a number of the documents that were being asked for could have had concerns about the safety of individuals, issues around identity, issues around security, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. And what I've been told by the police is there was no incentive for the police to try and stop the panel getting the documentation they needed. The issue was the delay it took them providing the documents to the panel. That being said, you've seen the headlines of the panel report. They were damning in relation to the police's response from 1987 up till a few years ago. and we've got to make sure we take on board the criticisms they've made and act on the recommendations they made.
And do you have any idea why the Home Secretary delayed the publication of the report in ways that were very roundly criticised by the panel?
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of that. I mean, it's an issue between the Home Sec and the panel. It is unprecedented, and you'll have seen the comments again of the Baroness leading the panel of her views of that. But no, that's an issue for the Home Sec.
All right, Colette, thank you. Let's go to Natalie, who's in Chelsea. Natalie, what would you like to ask the Mayor?
Good morning, Natalie.
Good morning. Hi. I was a victim of rape in April in London. I'm currently going through the process with the Rasto team and the Metropolitan Police. The Rasto teams are doing everything that they can to support me, but I am absolutely aghast at the statistics in London of rape going through the ceiling, and yet the conviction rates are so low. As a victim of this horrific crime, I want to know what you're going to do based on the current situation and on the recent rape report that's come out. What is going to be done to protect people like me, to have better outcomes, have better support in place? My Rasto team said directly to me not that long ago, the Metropolitan Police is broke. There is no support in place and we are completely under-resourced. Why is this happening when the statistics of rape in London are so high?
Well, Natalie, I'm incredibly sorry for your experience. And there's not a lot you've said I can disagree with. One of the things that we've done in London, of course the report today is for the entire country, is to appoint the first ever London Victims Commissioner. And Claire Waxman has highlighted some of the points you've said over the last few years. The numbers of people who make an allegation or report, I'm afraid, over the last few years, which leads to a successful conviction, is as low as 3%. In London, it's 6%. It's nowhere near good enough, Natalie. And many victims and survivors actually give up on the criminal justice system and it doesn't reach trial, the so-called attrition rates, the cases being stopped. So in London, we're doing a number of things to address that, which is we're having more advocates to help the victims of rape through the process. We're also making sure there's more support for victims able to give evidence without the need to be in the court on the day of the trial by recording in advance their testimony to avoid the trauma of the cross-examination, which can sometimes feel like victimization for the victim and survivor. But also we're quite concerned, actually, that the CPS police practice of taking away a mobile phone from a victim and then downloading the data on that phone and not returning the phone for a long time. So what we've done, Natalie, is made these recommendations to the government based upon the rape review that Claire Waxman undertook. And that's why today's report from the government actually supports some of the things we've been saying. But what we're saying to the government is we can't wait for 1, 2, 3 years for the recommendations to be acted on for the government. We need rapid progress now. And the biggest concern now, the most immediate concern now, actually, is the backlog of cases in the courts, which means some rape cases aren't reaching trial for 2 years, 3 years after the initial incident happened.
Not better, isn't it?
Well, there's a way to address that, Natalie, which is to make sure there are more courts in London, so-called Nightingale courts, which could sit later, we could sit on the weekends, we could reopen new buildings to progress these trials, because James is right, it could get worse before it gets better. And there's nothing worse, Natalie, than the delay, this cloud hanging over you while you're waiting for justice, hopefully, to occur. And that's one of the reasons why we're supporting victim support, to help people like you, as well as victims group and survivors groups, so they can support rape victims to get through the process. One of the things that upsets me, James, I speak as a former lawyer, is in rape trials, often the credibility of the victim is what's on trial rather than the defendant in the dock. And that's why it's really important, Natalie, we change the culture around these sorts of offences, because my worry is victims of sexual abuse, victims of rape won't come forward and report it if they haven't got confidence in those investigating it.
Which means that the figures, shocking as they are, may in reality be even worse.
Well, it could well be. And when you speak to survivor groups and victims groups, they say the figures that we know about could be the tip of the iceberg because of the underreporting. And I'm afraid, James, high-profile cases like the awful murder of Sarah Everard don't help, because what it does is it reduces the confidence in women and girls to come forward and report these things.
It leads us back partly to Cressida Dick, actually, doesn't it? Because you speak of a change in culture and the importance of people coming forward being believed. And then with Operation Midland, believing accusations that turned out to be completely untrue, despite an officer calling them credible and true quite early on, in the case of the man who was known as Nick, and we now know to be Carl Beach. That it's very hard to square that circle. The change of culture, telling people that they will be believed, and then an incredibly high-profile case of a man who was believed but turned out to be lying, is another reason why people wonder how Cressida Dick is still in her job. 6 different Home Secretaries calling for an investigation into that whole Operation Midland, and yet she's still there.
I mean, again, both Operation Midland and the awful Daniel Morgan murder as well, both happened some time ago. Cressida Dick became the Commissioner 4 years ago, and I think it is really important to get the timeline in place. That being said, if she was here, she'd be saying that the buck stops with her, she's the Commissioner, but it's important to be accurate in relation to the timeline of both Midland and the Daniel Morgan murder, but also when the worst corruption occurred, according to the panel. The key thing we've got to do is make sure that when somebody comes forward and reports an allegation, whether it's a sexual abuse or rape, that they're listened to sensitively, the evidence is taken down and recorded properly, the police work closely with the forensics and with the CPS in a sensitive way, and the case progresses through the criminal justice system swifter than it currently is. And also the big innovation, Natalie, is we're making sure you're very complimentary about the team helping you, but there are advisors to assist you through this process, because often you're by yourself, and we don't want any victim suffering in silence. Of course, James, not every single person who reports an allegation and every single person who's charged will lead to a successful prosecution. That's the whole point of there being an adversarial criminal justice system where you can test the evidence in a court, and the CPS, before they charge, have their own tests before they charge. 2 basic things. One is, is there a likelihood of a prosecution based on the evidence they've seen? And secondly, if it's in the public interest to do so. So there are checks and balances built in, notwithstanding the awful, unfolding of Operation Midland.
Natalie, would you like to come back to the mayor? You don't have to, but I don't want to say goodbye without checking.
I would, and it's just a horrific situation to be in. I have to say, their processes are in place, but I wasn't able to access them because of the sheer volume of victims. So I had to pay for my own toxicology report, which cost me over £4,000. I've had to pay for my own counsellor because there's a 6-month waiting list. I'm currently experiencing extreme PTSD, and I'm having to pay out for all the support service because the system literally cannot cope. And, to be told directly by the police, who are doing their absolute best, that actually this is almost like a popularity contest. Let's see how you come out when we look at, your phone. I gave my phone over for 5 days. I have no problem with that. I have nothing to hide. All I want is for this person to be convicted. But, I just feel like I'm at a complete loss. I feel like I have no hope. And at this point, the police are coming to see me next week. At this point, I'm thinking, I might as well just pull out. What's the point? I'm looking at a 4-year wait now for a court hearing. If CPS even allow me the opportunity and the chance to have my case fairly tried, that's all I want, And it is absolutely harrowing. I can't even put it into words. It's shocking. It's not just the experience that's shocking. It's actually the statistics side of it. It's actually the process. And the RASO team saying to me, we feel hopeless too. There's very little that we can do. It has to go through the CPS, and 9 times out of 10, they don't even put it through to a trial. So where does that leave me the rest of my life living with this, but also no opportunity at all for me to have this case trialed and to have my case heard fairly? It's shocking. How do I live with that? Well, with a 38% suicide rate for rape victims, I'm at the point where I'm really seeing why that's the case. It is horrendous.
Well, Natalie, with your permission, could I ask you to give James's team your details, or I'll give James's team the details of my victims commissioner, because the victims commissioner will assist you and navigate you through this, because the systemic improvements in a number of years' time won't help you, but if you give James's team your details, I promise you we'll be very discreet and give it to my victims commissioner, Claire Waxman, who'll be in touch to help you navigate your way through this awful scenario you're in.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. 27 minutes after 10, you're listening to Speak to Sadiq on LBC with the Mayor of London, newly installed. I should add my congratulations to earlier callers. It was closer than you were expecting, though.
Not at all.
Yeah, it was.
Well, I don't know. biggest win of a sitting mayor ever, James. Not that I'm one to brag. The second biggest vote ever secured by a candidate, only been beaten by Mr. Khan in 2016. I'm not complaining, James, but we can have a talk about numbers if you want.
All right. Well, let's talk about Amersham and Chesham and the numbers there then. Worst result ever for the Labour Party in a by-election, I think.
Well, congratulations to the Lib Dem candidate elected as the new mayor of that seat. I think it shows the difference tactical voting can make, and I'm hoping in the by-election in a couple of weeks' time in Batley and Spen, people vote tactically, because there's only two candidates that can win that seat in Yorkshire. It's either the Labour candidate or the Tory candidate.
Tactical voting explains some of that result. It doesn't explain the catastrophic result for Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
I mean, come on. I mean, lots of people in that seat were voting against.
It's a fourth. They came fourth. They're going to lose their deposit. I can fully appreciate not winning, but this is unbelievably bad.
But if you're unhappy at the government, unhappy with their planning proposals, unhappy with what they're doing according to local constituents with HS2 and so forth, the only candidate that's viable that can beat the Tories are the Lib Dems. And so it's not surprising that many thousands who voted Labour in a general election decided in this by-election to vote Lib Dem. That's what by-elections often lead to, people voting tactically.
I'm going to push you one more time on, because, yes, that explains not winning. It possibly explains coming third. It doesn't explain doing this badly. When you factor in Hartlepool and then you add this, it's almost like you're not at the party at all.
Well, look, let's wait and see what happens in Batley and Spen in a couple of weeks' time. I mean, It could be said, James, with respect, that the Labour candidate won in London really well, so they're not doing that badly, and in Manchester, and in Liverpool, and in West Yorkshire, and in Wales. We've stopped the decline in Scotland. We won in West of England. We won in Bristol, and so it's hardly fair to say we're not at the party. It's disappointing if we're going to lose our deposit, but I can understand why people vote tactically in a by-election, and I'm hoping in 2 weeks' time, anybody who doesn't want another Tory MP in Parliament in that part of Yorkshire will vote Labour.
David is in Enfield. David, what would you like to ask the mayor?
Good morning, Sadiq.
Good morning, David.
Congratulations on your re-election.
Cheers, mate.
It's a question about tourism. In 2019, prior to COVID, of the 40 million foreign tourists that came to the UK, 22 million came to London.
Wow.
And they spent £16 billion is the figure I saw. And obviously last year, as we know, the numbers collapsed by about 75%. So I have two questions. How do you intend to get these tourists back in view of the importance of the industry to the city? And what is the expected time frame?
Yeah, good question, David.
Can I add to that? It's been announced in the last half an hour that Carnival will be cancelled again for the second year running. No Notting Hill Carnival, which is of course also a major tourist attraction. So if you could include that in your answer.
Yeah. So David, you're spot on about your the financial consequences of the collapse of international tourism and indeed domestic tourism. And we need them back as soon as possible. What we've launched, David, since I was re-elected mayor, is the biggest domestic tourism campaign London's ever seen. It's called #Let'sDoLondon. And in the short term, David, our focus is getting Londoners back to the West End, but also people across the country coming to London. And what we're trying to explain to people is actually this may be the only summer ever you get to enjoy our great theatres, museums, galleries, live music without having to queue with international tourists, ahead of you. And so we're keen to get at least some business for our hospitality industry in London. And David, not only the money you talked about, but 1 out of 5 jobs in London is in retail, hospitality or culture. So it's really important we support the tourism economy going forward. And we've brought together, David, all the key players across London working with us in relation to a roadmap to get tourism back in London. We're working closely with the government about international tourism. You'll have seen President Biden and Boris Johnson talk about a US UK path that's in the green light system, and we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But we're doing whatever we can to encourage people back to the West End and back to London from the rest of the country, working with various people across the city, not least the London Eye, Madame Tussauds, the V&A, British Museum and so forth. In relation to the Carnival, David, you'll have heard what James is talking about. This morning, the fantastic team behind the Carnival, Notting Hill Carnival, have announced that, unfortunately, because of the extension of the restrictions, they won't be able to this year hold a carnival, a second year in a row, where there'll be a virtual carnival than a real one. The reason why carnival is important, not just celebrating our diversity, but it brings together more than 1 million people across our city, and it does bring people to West London and elsewhere as well. So it's disappointing, but we understand because of the pandemic why that decision's been taken. But just to reassure you, David, we're working incredibly hard to get tourism back to London as soon as possible.
32 minutes after 10 is the time. I'm a bit of an anorak when it comes to wandering around London and tracking businesses and what they are doing. Are you aware, do you have more insight and information than we do about the ones that aren't going to come back, the premises that are going to remain empty? Because I see quite a few, including some household names, particularly in the restaurant sector, who don't look to me like they're planning on ever coming back.
No, 1 out of 5 of our businesses didn't reopen when they were supposed to. And that's 1 out of 5 who could close permanently. And the perfect storm is this, James. The government, for reasons that we understand, has extended the reopening by 4 weeks from June the 21st to July the 19th. At the same time, they've reduced business support to these businesses, so a reduction in the business rates relief, a reduction in the furlough scheme. They were going to get rid of the moratorium around evictions. Thankfully, they've done a U-turn on that. And so businesses are really struggling. And that's why it's really important for the government to give the businesses support just for another 4 weeks. That's all we're asking for, because they've given support over the last 4 months.
But then it could be another 4 weeks. And I mean, you just don't know, do you? Not to defend them, but just to remind you that the postponement is now more expected than not.
Well, in which case what the government should do is extend the support until restrictions are completely lifted. Some businesses have reopened and they're working on a loss. They see it as a loss leader until the full reopening on July the 19th. And so we've one of the reasons why David's question is so important is we've got to help our businesses by safely using the restaurants, the bars, going to the theatres. I went to the theatre, 2 Sundays ago. Really enjoyable night. I felt incredibly safe. And many of our businesses have spent lots of money to make sure they are COVID safe, and let's support them.
Have you seen this story about UEFA threatening to move the big games, the finals and the semis from Wembley, if they're not allowed to bring in thousands of staff unquarantined? Well,
what it is the Euros is the biggest event UEFA organise every 4 years, and it's really big. If you remember, the Champions League final was going to take place at Wembley, and then it was moved to Porto, ostensibly because they as part of the deal, they wanted to invite 2,000 of their top officials, colleagues from FAs across Europe to the final. We're working closely with the government, with the councils, with UEFA to try and make sure that we can address some of the issues they're raising. We've got to recognise, though, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. The Delta variant
is it possible
here.
Then? Is it? I mean, how likely is it? Because an awful lot of people listening to this will be very spooked by the idea of, is it 2,500 officials being able to fly into the country without going through any of the measures that normal travellers would have to?
And that's one of the reasons why we've got to make sure it's done. If people do arrive, it's got to happen safely. We've got to make sure the various checks happen. What we can't have is what we saw most of last year, people landing at Heathrow and Gatwick or on the Eurostar and just coming off and wandering around our city, potentially with a variant or the virus in another form. You'll remember a conversation that was had a number of weeks ago about which countries should be on the red list countries. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan went on the red list. India didn't because the Prime Minister wanted to deal with India, which led to the current Delta variant.
Do you think it's that simple? You think the current Delta variant, which is not going as badly as some feared, the latest numbers are encouraging, but there's still numbers that hinge upon the introduction of the Delta variant to the population. Do you see it in such simple terms that he postponed it recklessly in hope of flying to India to make some announcement about trade?
Yeah. I mean, look at the numbers in relation to the variant in India versus Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. It was higher there. They went on the red list countries. India didn't. And actually, India only went on the red list countries when the Prime Minister cancelled his trip to India, I think, the same day. And so that delay was a problem and was a factor in the variant arriving in London. Many of the people who arrived from that part of the world weren't being quarantined, may not have been self-isolating. And I think it's really important to learn the lessons of mistakes made in the past.
I started reading out some of the stranger texts that we get when you're in the studio last year, and then I stopped again. But it occurs to me, people sometimes need to know what you deal with on a very, very regular basis. So John in Romford's been in touch to say the very crafty London mayor was only elected for his religious beliefs, not his ability to do the job. He will destroy London as planned, writes John in Romford. Is this a plan you're aware of?
Well, maybe John can share these plans with me so we can be part of this conspiracy.
Amanda in Reading, to take up this question about the quarantine and the football, what would you like to ask the Mayor?
Hey, Amanda, good morning.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Hi there. Do you think that we need to tighten up these rules with regards to COVID? And should the Euro finals be moved to Hungary, be moved there for the safety of everybody?
Yes and no. So yes, I do believe we should have proper border controls to do our best to minimise the chances of viruses coming into our country, particularly different variants of the virus coming into our country. And people who do come to this country from overseas, we need to make sure that we can be confident they're not bringing the virus with them. Because if we don't, Amanda, all the hard work we do, in the country, the huge sacrifices we've made can be undone by new variants. But no, I don't think the final or the semi should be moved from Wembley to Budapest.
Well, hang on, you can't have it both ways. I mean, I didn't think I would as well, but the more I read into it, the more and the more I look at what the national government has got right since this nightmare started, the more I wonder whether this is something else we're going to look back on with a sense of wonder, like we did the beaches last summer, 2,500 people flying in, more or less freely.
Well, all I'd say in a sensitive, polite, courteous way is don't believe all you see in the media about the threats made by UEFA to the government. UEFA, okay. Amanda, I can reassure, are talking to the government. They are talking to us. They are talking to Wembley. They're talking to the FA. They're talking to the councils. Because you can understand, Amanda, the conundrum they have, which is this is the one big event in 4 years. They want to get as many of their officials to watch the finals as they can. So it's a conversation that's been had, and so not unreasonably in a conversation, the government's going to be saying, hold on a sec, we're a bit concerned about anybody coming here without proper checks and balances. They're going to be saying we'd like as many people as possible to come, and so an accommodation has got to be reached. Our priority's got to be, Amanda, the health and safety of people in our country, which is of paramount concern for the reasons, not just the reasons James alluded to, but we don't want to be back at square one, after 15, 16 months of sacrifices, with the light at the end of the tunnel finally there with the reopening on July the 19th.
Speaking of conundrums, I mean, they're all very welcome and they add to the general jollity of this postcode enormously. But there are 20,000 Scotsmen in town and they've got nowhere to watch the game.
Well, there's some women as well.
Of course.
So, look, by the way, I think the game tonight's going to be great. And to my Scottish friends, apologies, but I predict an England win. But my message to...
Thanks, Nostradamus.
My message to those Scotsmen and women who are in London already for the game is please, 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 if you've not got a ticket to the game, try and book now for somewhere to watch the game tonight safely in a pub or a bar or a restaurant, because you can't just rock up to a pub and see the game and you're going to miss the game. It's going to be a great game, so please do that. To those who haven't yet arrived, listen to this, please don't come to London unless you've got a ticket for the game or somewhere safe to watch it. Why? Because of COVID-19, we've only got one fan zone, and that's limited to 750 people because of social distancing rules. And those places have been given up already to key workers who I think deserve to watch the game on a big screen in Trafalgar Square. We simply can't provide other fan zones across our city because of COVID, and so you'll miss the game. And so what I don't want is that you come in missing the game, but also inadvertently the virus spreading because you're in close proximity with other people.
They are already here.
A few thousand are, and they were outside last night. I know
not quite all of them, but it felt like it. And no. Did you toy with the idea of providing fan zones, of putting up big screens somewhere?
It wasn't possible. I mean, we looked into the possibility. By the way, had the Scotland game happened after restrictions are lifted, we would have had fan zones all across London. We had plans for, Greenwich, Hyde Park and elsewhere. It wasn't possible because we're still in restrictions, but also we're now additionally concerned about the spread of the Delta variant. And so we want a successful game tonight. We want a safe game tonight. And so please, to those, Scotsmen and women in London today, have a great time today and tomorrow. But please reserve something to watch it today if you're in London. If you're not in London and you're thinking of coming, unless you've got a ticket for the game or you've pre-arranged somewhere to watch it safely, I say this with respect and somebody who usually invites people to London, please don't come.
And if they do, I mean, what have you got measures in place? You've got policing issues already established? Because one imagines, I'm sure this isn't going to shock you, but I would be very surprised. I'll do my prediction now that there will be enormous gatherings of football fans in places like Leicester Square and Trafalgar Square, and they won't be studiously observing coronavirus.
Oh no, and listen, we knew that on Thursday, Friday, Saturday there'd be lots of Scottish men and women in our city. The Met Police Service have got a plan to deal with this, working with partners like the British Transport Police, with Police Scotland, with the train operating companies, with great councils across London as well, and many other partners to make sure we manage those Scottish fans coming to our city. Thankfully, very, very, very few arrests have been made because, as we'd expect, Scottish fans are behaving incredibly well. But I just remind our friends in Scotland who are here, But, often when you've had a bit to drink, you may not follow and adhere to the rules as well as you otherwise would. So please, just be cognizant and be aware. We still are in the middle of this awful coronavirus pandemic.
Denny is in Tower Hamlets, staying in London. Denny, what would you like to ask the Mayor?
Hi, James. Hi, Sadiq.
Good morning.
Really nervous, by the way.
Don't be nervous. James ain't that scary.
I actually emailed you last year, Sadiq. I'm currently studying the knowledge of London, and that was the time that we were going through all the road closures and ever-increasing road closures at the moment. And I just wanted to email you to get your thoughts, and was it worth investing the next sort of 3 to 4 years of my life?
And how much money? How much money as well? Because you could buy a vehicle at the end of it.
I just
had
my first exam.
Yes.
Well, 2 exams. One, the written test is £200, and then to get on your appearances, it's £400. And then you have your school money. You obviously have your petrol money. It's time. It's time away with your family. If you're working as well, you've got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
It's brilliant. Should she crack on with the knowledge or not?
Danny, did you pass your exam?
I did. I passed my
Congratulations.
first one. And I suppose this is another point, because when I went up to the Tottenham Court Road changes, Mr. Camden, now I'll call him, that was the one that introduced the new road changes. He said, there's lots of knowledge people up here at the minute. You must have a big exam. And what people sort of don't understand about the knowledge, it can take up to 3 to 10 years of your life. It's not just one big exam. And I think that's probably why the black cab trade are getting so frustrated, because it's time, money and effort that they train just to do a job that they want to safely drop their clients off to their front door, and now that's been taken away from them. So, I did get a response from one of your colleagues saying that you did support the knowledge and you went to trade shows.
Jenny, I've got the First Minister of Wales waiting to talk to us, so I don't want to keep him on hold indefinitely. So I am just going to push to the question, which I think is: would you advise Jenny to carry on with her training or not? And I'm going to insist on a binary answer to this.
Yes. And I just say, Danny, there are other issues why the black cab trade is doing less well than it has in the past. It's not just about road closures. You've now got competition from tens of thousands of private hire vehicles who have a sat nav and buy a vehicle much cheaper, and many people are making the choice to use those rather than black cabs. But I think the black cabs are fantastic if you're because the knowledge the drivers have, vehicles that are accessible to those who are disabled. Many more black cabs are now zero emission vehicles and so forth. So yes, but go into it with open eyes, Denny, because you will have met colleagues who are really struggling because not just because of the pandemic, but because of the competition from private hire vehicles. You'll be aware, Denny, that I've said to PHVs they've got to pay the C charge now for the first time. You're also aware that we originally refused Uber the license when they went to court and got the license back again. So we're doing what we can, Denny, to help the black cab trade, but I'm not going to pretend and sugarcoat that it's not challenging for your industry.
We have run out of time. I need to tell everybody that we're doing our State of London meeting, I suppose we'd have to call it, next Thursday at 7 p.m. If you search for State of London LBC, you'll find a pathway to registering your questions, because it will not be a phone-in. All the questions need to be registered on the london.gov website. I know the Mayor's office, Sadiq Khan, will tweet out the link after today's show, so will I. And if you want more information on those London Stadium vaccinations, then also check the Mayor of London's Twitter after the show. Sadiq Khan, many thanks. I'll see you next week then.
Take care, mate. See you then.
Fantastic. It's 10:46.
LBC.